movement arbiter. So yes, we are recording. Thank you so much, Noah, for turning that on. I totally forgot about that. I want to share that often traumatic events are unexpected, as the COVID-19 experience was completely unexpected, I think, for many of us. Individuals may experience a traumatic event directly. They may witness the event. They could feel threatened, or they could hear about an event that affects someone they know. So again, as I'm having this discussion, it is with the utmost empathy and care that I want to take that many of us have been directly impacted by these issues and many others. Events could be human-made, they could be mechanical in error, such as a disaster, a war, sexual abuse, violence, and so on and so forth. Trauma can occur at any age or developmental stage, and often events that occur outside the expected life stages are perceived as traumatic. So a young person passing away before their parent, a young person with cancer or personal illness, or as we've discussed in terms of poverty, losing a job before you're planning to do so. Now, another important part of trauma that we're going to unpack throughout this presentation is environmental factors. Because as preventionists, we really look at the community as a system. We look at individuals that we serve as part of larger systems that they operate within. And so we want to be mindful that environmental factors greatly influence how we're going to respond emotionally and how it impacts our overall social well-being. So something to think about in terms of our determinants of health, if you're familiar with that, is a fundamental determinant of health versus illness is the degree of fit between an individual's biological, behavioral, and socio-cultural needs and the resources available to them. So I ask you, what does your community look like? What is happening there? And what are the resources available to try to meet the new needs that may exist within your communities? So when we talk throughout this presentation, we're thinking about prevention, we're thinking about intervention as well, and other treatment approaches that are going to integrate a combination of strategies that are both individual, interpersonal, and also are going to think about the community as a system and how we, as part of our programs, can address the systems that our communities are navigating. So I would love for you all to use the chat. How do you define trauma-informed prevention? Before you came in here, you may have had a thought about this. What does it mean to be trauma-informed to you? And yeah, drop that in the chat. And it says, I wanted to have this very dramatic moment where everybody's like typing the chat and then doing it all at once. But why don't we just go ahead and, if you have a thought, share it into the field. But certainly there's no requirements to share by any means. As those who are formulating their thoughts to share in the chat, I just want to point you all to two really important studies that discuss and unpack trauma in a way that us as behavioral health practitioners can really understand and engage into our work. And so first and foremost, I want to point out the Adverse Childhood Experiences study that was conducted by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This was released in 2013. It was a large study involving more than 17,000 individuals from the US. It analyzed long-term effects of childhood and adolescent traumatic experiences on the adult health risks, mental health, and healthcare costs and life expectancy of the individuals that were studied. Now, many of us are familiar with the term ACEs, so Adverse Childhood Experiences. I want to point you all to that study. If you aren't familiar with it and you work with young people, this study is essential to just give us an idea of where could trauma be living in the lives of young people. Another really important study, while much of what we're focused on is young people, we know that in prevention, we also serve a wide variety of individuals from all over the lifespan. So I want to point you all to the Women, a Co-Occurring Disorders and Violence study. This occurred in 2007, so it's getting right up to that 10-year mark, or rather it's over the 10-year mark, but this was a large multi-state study that focused on the role of interpersonal and other traumatic stressors among women specifically. It looked at the interrelatedness of trauma, violence, and co-occurring issues such as substance abuse or mental health disorders, and gave us some really great grounding on what women specifically are navigating, who are often the individuals who we serve in our movement. So it looks like no one's thrown anything into the chat, which is completely fine because you're here to learn about that. You're here to talk about it, right? Hopefully by the end of this presentation, you can have a formative opinion about what it means to be trauma informed in your prevention practice, in your education practice, in your counseling practice, or wherever else you are landing in the behavioral health continuum of service. All right, so let's jump into this. Now, first and foremost, I want to just get some grounding on what we're talking about here. Trauma in the brain, we're talking about young people specifically, and we're thinking about how young people could react to trauma, really how anybody can react to trauma, right? So we often see trauma divided into, well, we've heard of three of these main ones. It's kind of very common. So we've heard of fight, flight, and freeze. Below each one of these on the screen, you see some examples of what these trauma responses can look like. There is another way that we can respond to trauma, and that's through fawning. So this looks like being a people pleaser. It could mean that you lack boundaries in that you're always letting people have access to you, tell you what you need to do, etc. It could look like feeling overwhelmed and being unable to speak for yourself or speak up in the movement. And it could also look like the need for approval. So those are just some of the ways that people could respond through a fawning response. Have people heard of these 4 responses? Let's see. Yeah. Oh, am I not sharing my screen? Can folks not see it? Oh, no one sees it.
No, we don't see it.
Oh, well, that's not fun. All right, let's see what I did here. Oh, okay. One more step.
There you go.
Folks, hold on one second. How's that? Can you see it?
Perfect.
Okay. Good. You know, I think this answers what was happening in the first place to my screen and why I was having a problem. But you know what? I promise that I have used Zoom before. So in the chat, folks, some people are saying that they've not heard of the fawn response. Some folks are saying that they have heard of it. This is an emerging domain that people are considering when they think of trauma responses. Now, I want to share that there's no like right or wrong answer. You could really respond across this spectrum in any way, shape, or form, and with any combination of these responses. And it's very unpredictable. And so part of what we as practitioners need to think about is the person sitting in front of me, could they be responding to trauma in some way, shape, or form? So becoming angry, being difficult within the conversation, is the person you're working with having difficulty making decisions? This could be an impact of trauma and allow us to think and kind of consider, you know, maybe this person that I'm navigating is dealing with trauma. So check it out. Look up fawn if you've never heard about it. It is an emerging domain that folks are wanting to consider as a way that people are responding to trauma, responding to violence within their lives. So these 4 domains that I just introduced to you all signifies to us that if we are working with communities who are navigating these circumstances, there is a need for customized support, which is really essential. What is one of the cornerstones of engaging a trauma-informed response is offering that customized support to the individuals that we serve. So are we meeting our stakeholders where they are? And what does that actually mean? So for example, I just mentioned an angry participant in our group. Are we reacting to that individual in a way that would create more barriers, or are we creating space for them to, 1, express themselves, 2, ensure that they get the support that they need to, to debrief and unpack the issues that they're dealing with, and to get the support that they need? Is the prevention strategy that we're engaging in that particular moment, is it going to re-traumatize the individuals that we serve? Using key trauma-informed principles is essential to addressing trauma-related prevention, intervention, and other treatment strategies in our DV movement. What's really important to think about also is that while the focus of my presentation is thinking about prevention, because that is the realm that I operate in, it really is adaptable across behavioral health settings. So if you're working in a counseling forum, if you're working in a um, wherever you're working, it should be customizable and adaptable to those service areas. So we see that, let's see, we have some chats going on here. So JJ shares, being mindful that everyone may have experienced trauma and doing their best to respond and interact with others with empathy and kindness. Don't make things harder on people, no matter if you know if they have trauma or not. Trauma-informed care helps us understand what and how a person interprets what has happened to them, keeping in mind their social determinants of health. Thank you, JJ, and thank you, Renee. You're really speaking directly to my heart, and I think you could probably be up here doing this presentation with me, because that's absolutely right. You know, one of the things that is really essential for us to know is that we're often not going to know if someone is navigating trauma. Depending on our depth of relationship with those individuals, we may not be able to ever see or hear meaningful markers that say, hey, this person is going through trauma. So we have to make room for that as just a norm. Let's see, we got more. Acknowledge that people may not respond to trauma the way you would expect. Let's see, is this? Okay, oh my gosh, Renee, you read my mind. So I'm gonna just flip over to this next screen. Dr. Frankel says an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior, actually. People responding to trauma in any way, shape, or form is actually responding to trauma. There is no kind of easy way to unpack this, but what we know is that many people are navigating trauma, and we must engage trauma-informed principles in our work so that we can engage in less harm, re-traumatization. So becoming aware, becoming trauma aware and knowledgeable about the impact and consequences of traumatic experiences for individuals and communities is part of becoming trauma aware. Evaluating and initiating your use of appropriate trauma-related screening tools and assessment tools, and how you're engaging those within your prevention work is essential. You should be implementing interventions from a collaborative, strengths-based approach, appreciating the resilience of trauma survivors. So how is your prevention curricula informed? Who informed it? Have you had a chance to bring your stakeholders to the table and inform how your strategies are impacting them? Today, I hope to bring to you all core principles and practices that reflect a trauma-informed lens to help you have the skill to anticipate the need for specific trauma-informed treatment strategies or trauma-informed prevention strategies that support an individual's navigation to a more safer, healthier relationships dynamics. And most important, and I think something that folks have shared here is we often are not going to know if the audience that we're speaking to is navigating trauma. So by incorporating trauma-informed principles, this trauma-informed framework, what we're ensuring is that we're decreasing the inadvertent re-traumatization of the communities that we serve. And so through all of this, we hope that you're then going back to your community and or rather your organization, and evaluating how your trauma-informed strategies have been impacting your community, how they're impacting your organization, and how they can be adopted across the various disciplines that exist under your program. Let's see, we've got some more. Sure, so we've got Jacqueline. We shared that Jacqueline shared that trauma is going to come out in very many ways, and we may not anticipate or even have seen how trauma is going to manifest. Alma shares, very true. It is sad that it took a pandemic to get going to start getting knowledge about trauma, mental and other issues, mental health and other issues. You're absolutely right. I think this global experience has let us know that we're all susceptible to this. If we've lived a life where we've not experienced trauma, this experience has shown us how fragile life and the safety of our communities can be if we're not all actively sharing in the safety making of our communities. So I've shared a lot about trauma-informed practice, why we're adopting it within prevention, but I just want to share a little bit more about what we're hoping to accomplish by infusing a trauma-informed practice into our work. So first and foremost, I mentioned oppression. I mentioned systemic racism at the front as one of these co-occurring pandemics, even though systemic racism has been around as long as the United States has been around and not longer. What we're seeing is that by incorporating trauma-informed principles in this framework, we're combating oppression because we're instinctually making space for those who have been more impacted by, we'll just say, COVID-19 or monkeypox, for example, whatever issue we're dealing with as a society, and even systemic racism. So by incorporating these principles, we're combating oppression in our communities and in the lives of young people, which then are growing up and hopefully doing those same things for the people that they're leading. We hope that through infusing our spaces with trauma-informed principles, that we're undoing trauma in our communities. We're showing that there are others who are caring and who are helping to build safer communities around them. I mentioned earlier that by adapting trauma-informed principles into our prevention work, we are taking a strengths-based approach to looking at our communities. So this is where it is very important for us to pause and think about what informed our work. Did we choose to go to this school because they're a problem school, because there are high rates of violence? Yes, and why else are we in that community? Where can we switch our lens to capitalize on the many strengths that every community exists, that every community maintains within the structure of their various cultural dynamics within that community? It is essential within our prevention practice to build trust. Whenever we're sitting with a community, we're always wanting to get them to open up more to us, to share with us how their lives are and how we can help them achieve healthier relationships. That's only done through building trust. For us to learn more about the trauma young people experience or the individuals that we're serving are experiencing, we've got to build those strong networks where people know that we are a trusting individual. And it starts by modeling these trauma-informed principles that we're going to specifically talk about here in just a moment. One of those principles is choice. And by offering choice back to the stakeholder, we allow for empowerment, we allow for self-efficacy to begin to flourish if it has not already. And overall, what we're hoping to do is create safer environments where young people and adults who are engaged in prevention can learn more about healthy relationships. And then in turn, the outcome that we hope is that the community at large becomes safer. So Sam is sharing, let's see, Sam is sharing, trauma not transformed is transferred. And those who find deeper inner healing and peace are able to acknowledge, understand, integrate, and move into a direction of reconciliation, redemption, and restoration, connecting the disconnected. Oh my gosh, I am feeling your comment, Sam. Resilience and perseverance is a product of this practice of trauma-informed work and social work. Yes, thank you, fellow social worker, is what I'm feeling here in this comment, Sam. And you're absolutely right. You know, I mentioned earlier, being trauma-informed starts here. How have you been impacted by trauma? How have you transformed your trauma? And how can that help you serve other individuals? because it's going to start here. Part of us assessing our bias, and this is an ethical practice, right? For those of us who are social workers, it's an ethical practice for us to consider, how are we being impacted by bias? How are we impacted by trauma, so that we don't go into communities and re-traumatize the individuals that we are so eager to serve and support. So yes, thank you, Sam. It starts here. It starts with the individual, the 60 something people that are here in this room listening to me and reading the amazing perspectives of those in the chat. Sam goes on to say, hurt people, heal people. Thank you. Book, mic drop, mouse drop, however you want to say that. Deanna shares, yes, modeling them is essential. Those providing services also should do self-awareness work and move through their own lived experience for effective work. I'm in a room with kindred spirits, I know that. So apologies for all the things that I'm going to share that you already know. Because these comments are clear that you are all committed to transforming yourselves to become trauma-informed practitioners. And just as a side note, who here is doing prevention specifically, working in communities? Maybe you're doing education of some sort of psychoeducation. Would love to hear if you're part of that group of individuals. Feel free to drop it in the chat. So San Antonio is an incredible community. For those of you who are in the San Antonio community right now or coming from it from another place, San Antonio has been doing incredible work to respond to the rates of domestic violence and dating violence within their communities, to give young people a chance at their lives. And while so much work has been done, I'm sure there is still so much more work to do. We have such diversity within all of our communities, and we always want to ensure that we're offering culturally specific, culturally relevant strategies that are going to help individuals. But I'm curious, how is your community responding? What are you seeing within your community that's helping people get reconnected, helping to combat trauma? It may not be holding a healing circle. It may be holding a food bank. It may be having a Facebook group where people can vent. What are you seeing in your community? Virginia Henderson, welcome, community outreach worker. So glad to have you. You are on the front line working with communities, and I can imagine that your work is extremely nuanced, and you're seeing this first and foremost as an individual who's navigating these experiences in your own work. So please continue to share in the chat. Sorry, continue to share in the chat, and would love to hear more how your community is responding if something comes up throughout, and of course, I'll bring it into the space. All right, talked a lot about why we should even, like, why are we invested in trauma-informed approaches? Why should every single person be infusing a trauma-informed lens into their work? I mean, if we haven't already identified, then we know that we've all navigated this pandemic, and we're all navigating various levels of trauma. But what are the specific elements of a trauma-informed approach? And they're relatively simple. And the literature across sectors will tell us that these 4 essential strategies, in a nutshell, are how we're going to infuse our work with a trauma-informed lens. Now, I want to be mindful that these are broad. And I would love to hear specifically in the chat how you're infusing this, if you are, or if you have thoughts of how you can infuse these particular strategies to your specific work. So it starts with understanding that there is prevalence of trauma. And based on the chat, Jacqueline, you provide awareness and prevention on our campus, working with adult young people, which is an incredible opportunity. Would love to learn more about your work, just on a side note. Jacqueline also shares that they receive a positive response, and a lot of the time they hear they were not aware of the issue that they're addressing. Jacqueline, even, I take for granted, and everybody here, I take for granted that steeped in this work. I know all about healthy relationships, and I've known about them for a long time, right? I've known a lot about trauma-informed work, and I've been doing this work for a long time. I started in this work in 2002 when I was 22 years old. And many people don't have the luxury of the professional development that many of us in this room have had to understand what are healthy relationships, how do you achieve them, what are unhealthy relationships, what is abuse. And so it's never lost on me that the community that we're sitting with has never heard this message before. And so we still have so much work to do. And now we get the opportunity to infuse it with these trauma-informed elements. So first and foremost, again, I mentioned it starts by understanding that we've been impacted by trauma. The young people, the survivors that you're serving have been impacted by trauma. And if not, we just may not know about it yet. We want to recognize how trauma impacts individuals, but also recognize that it is extremely nuanced, it is extremely individual, and there may be dynamics that we could be reacting to that are actually part of the trauma response. So understanding that there is a prevalence of trauma, recognizing that trauma could be occurring right in front of me, and you may be able to recognize it or not. You may be being triggered by the way that someone is responding to their trauma. And so having an awareness and recognizing all those things are how, when you step into a space, you're infusing yourself with trauma-informed principles. You are also assessing how trauma has impacted specifically a meso-level community, for example. What are the overarching issues that could be affecting the social determinants of health of that specific community? This requires us to step back and think about the communities that we're serving individually, and think about the rates of employment, the rates of unemployment, the rates of healthcare coverage, the way that this community has been resourced during the COVID-19 pandemic. Could this community be reacting or responding to high levels of systemic racism that is occurring in their communities? What is the experience of these young people, if you're working with young people, in their school campus? What are the dynamics within that particular school community that we need to consider? So we sit back and we engage in these assessments, and we use that information that is specific to each community, and we inform our work. We sit back and we look at our curricula. We look at the ways in which we're engaging survivors, and we harken back to that one thing that I mentioned: how are we not re-traumatizing the individuals that we serve? Could this conversation, could this resource, could this strategy, or this time in which I'm offering this service, could this be part of the re-traumatization of the community that I'm seeking to serve? And overall, if you're infusing a trauma-informed perspective, you are avoiding that. So we're not just saying, but my grant says that I have to do this. We're not saying that, oh, but my boss wants me to do it like this. We're saying, I've stopped, I've assessed, and now I am speaking up about the changes that need to occur within my curricula, within my organization, and just within the way that I'm operating within my prevention realm. Now, again, this is extremely broad because each community is different. Each community has been impacted by COVID-19 in vast, very disparate ways. So where are you gathering your information? How are you hearing from your stakeholders to ensure that you have a full handle on how they could be navigating the pandemic? Many individuals experience trauma during their lifetimes, although many people exposed to trauma demonstrate few or no lingering systems. Symptoms. People can certainly be able to manage through all of these things. Those individuals who have been impacted by or experienced repeated chronic or multiple traumas are more likely to exhibit pronounced symptoms and consequences. So things like substance misuse, chronic mental health issues, chronic health issues, and just an inability to adhere or develop healthy relationships, which is what we're all about Subsequently, trauma can significantly affect how an individual engages in major life areas, as well as how they're going to respond to you in the moment as you're engaging in prevention or any other service that you provide to the community that you serve. So your strategy should always ensure that it's creating the utmost safety for the people who are engaged in your conversation. Most likely the individuals that we're talking to about healthy relationships, even though they have not heard about it, may be navigating unhealthy relationships. So how do we ensure that we're keeping that safe space in everything that we do? I mentioned earlier that a tenet, a foundation of trauma-informed care or trauma-informed prevention is maximizing opportunities for choice and control. So we want to ensure that the individuals who are at the table have different ways to engage. So one way this could look is as an educator, because specifically we're here to talk about education, is how are we offering our lesson? Are there ways for learners of different styles to engage? You know, you have auditory learners, you have visual learners, you have learners who like to just dive in and share and learn by doing. So how does your learning strategy or your prevention strategy really scaffold all of those pieces and all of those different learning styles that are also impacted by trauma? Fostering connection, as I mentioned earlier, building trust is essential to being a trauma-informed practitioner, because we've got to build a connection. We've got to build trust in order for people to see us as one, deliverers of a message that is relevant to them. If they don't trust you, if they see you as outside the culture, if they see you as part of the problem, whatever that may look like. So for example, like if you're working for this nonprofit organization that receives government funds, maybe you navigate the CPS arena as many family violence providers do. Survivors who are working with you might see you as part of that system and not trust you. So you often working within nonprofits and sometimes even working within the domestic violence field, you've got to overcome that and foster connection in a way that's meaningful and helps people overcome that barrier of just you, who you are as a professional. Not to mention, you know, if you're carrying any other kind of trauma or engaged in a way that has caused harm. It's again, very important for us to manage our emotions and promote self-reflection, not only in the way that we operate ourselves, but giving strategies to the audiences and to the participants that we serve. That's what we're there to talk about. We want to talk about how you manage and promote, how you manage your emotions and promote self-reflection, how you are building the empathy response within young people. Have intentional endings and intentional follow-up. Many of us in the prevention realm, we get what I refer to as one and done type experiences. So we're invited to do a presentation and we may never go back. Don't let that be the case. How can you continue to stay connected to this audience of 50 people that you just served? Can they get your contact information? Can you offer them a virtual space to come back and learn more? There's so many ways in which we can get creative and re-engage in our communities. Part of essential perspective of prevention is dosage. And we can be challenged by those times when a school community or another community says, we want you to come and do this one-time presentation and then thank you. But we know in our heart of hearts, that actually we want to be there for a few more times. So think about how you can be more intentional about those endings and how you can engage in meaningful follow-up to foster that connection, because it is not uncommon that one and done presentation from your intentional and compassionate follow-up leads to a more robust experience that can occur. With all things in prevention, it's baby steps. We're here for the marathon, not the sprint. And so certainly want to kind of keep that in the space. So Sam has shared more information. Thank you, Sam. Has shared we do both here in SA. Fatherhood campaign with our culturally relevant and deeply rooted Indigenous perspective of knowing who we are. We can't know where we're going if we don't know where we've come from. Amen to that. We have a philosophy, la cultura cura. Our culture cures us through its roots of indigenous ancestry and our bloodline, our ethnicity, our heritage, our ceremonies, our celebrations, our traditions, customs, medicines that create us, that can create in us an opportunity for true transformational health and healing, addressing the historical and systemic issues of trauma of the past, of the nation and the people. I'm gonna stop now because I'm totally botching this. I think we can all read this, but thank you so much, Sam. This is incredibly insightful. And it seems like this year, 2 organizations have reached that level 1 TI certification, which is incredible, very exciting. Professional development is key. And there are, as Sam has illustrated here, there are ways for you to increase this. So this, this hour presentation is not going to make you a trauma-informed practitioner. There are really great ways in which you can adopt even more robust and sit in spaces where you can learn more robust strategies to trauma-informed care. Being vigilant about the prevalence and potential consequences of traumatic events among the participants that we serve allows us to tailor our presentation styles, our theoretical approaches, our intervention strategies from the moment we sit with our communities. Although not every client that we're going to serve or every participant that we're going to serve has experienced trauma, those who have had substance misuse experiences, mental health disorders are more likely to have experienced trauma. So we have to think about that. Being trauma aware does not mean that you must assume every part of someone's history of trauma, but rather you're anticipating the possibility from your initial contact interactions through any type of intake process, presentation process, assessment process, and you're making the appropriate accommodations as you're navigating through that ongoing assessment, ongoing realization of who it is that we're specifically serving. Overall, when you are engaging trauma-informed principles, you're increasing protective factors, which us as preventionists, that is what we are doing. By increasing protective factors, we increase the health of the community. We increase the likelihood that these individuals can progress and continue to undo trauma within their communities and within themselves. So think about trauma-informed practice. How can you engage these elements so that the individuals and the communities that we serve can further define their experiences? I think part of what is so great about our work that we do is we often give language to the experiences of individuals. So many people who, it was shared earlier, I think it could be both. So Renee is asking, does trauma-informed care deal more with a person's mental wellness or mental illness? So I look at it as a trauma-informed practitioner, when I meet with my client who may be navigating some sort of mental illness, that mental illness could be exacerbated by trauma, and the way that I react to this individual could increase the wellness that they're experiencing or give them strategies to hopefully develop more wellness within their own mind. So kind of both, Renee. You're kind of looking at these pieces and thinking, if I'm working with someone with a mental illness, let's say depression, how can I go into the space if I know that, which a lot of times we may not know that, and we want to offer a space where that person navigating this particular experience can sit with their experience, but also learn and engage in some sort of psychoeducation that offers them a space to think about what they've been through and think about the future where they could go. Overall, as kind of is illustrated here in the screen, what we're hoping is that those who are navigating mental illness, those who are not, those who are navigating physical health conditions, or across the spectrum of how people are impacted by trauma, that by us infusing these strategies, we're able to accomplish these kind of 5 different prongs that you see here on the screen. So folks feel supported by you and your organization, which could be great for the overall resource uptake that can occur. Their self-efficacy can be impacted positively. So maybe this person who's navigating mental illness is able to make future goals, even if it is being able to manage their own condition. And goals look different for every single person. And more than anything, while many of us are leaders in our communities and we sit in front of folks, we always want our participants to be taking the lead. We want them to be leading the conversation. We want them to be leading the kind of understanding of what you're presenting. And so you will see that carrying out if you're engaging these trauma-informed principles. Virginia shares, professional development is one of the ways we stay true to helping the people we serve and continuing to provide the best service. Staying trauma-informed is a continued process. You are absolutely right. Again, this is probably one more conversation you've had related to trauma-informed care. Trauma-informed prevention, thinking about when we're standing in front of communities, when we're giving presentations, when we're on a Zoom, how are we being mindful of trauma that our communities are impacted? And again, it is a continued process. There are so many levels and nuances to being a trauma-informed practitioner.
Yeah, okay. No telling.
So something to consider, as we've already mentioned, even the most standard behavioral health practices can re-traumatize an individual exposed to prior traumatic experiences if the provider implements them without recognizing or considering any of the harm that they may commit. For example, a prevention educator might develop an education plan that recommends something without considering the implications for the student. So the way that they learn, the specific experiences that they've had. If they've been a victim of domestic or dating violence or sexual assault, trauma awareness is an essential strategy for preventing this type of re-traumatization. It helps you reintroduce the need for us to reevaluate our practices. And that's what I hope that we come away with here, is that you're taking time to reevaluate your practice. You're taking time to think about how you may have been impacted by trauma within your life, how you are working through that. Becoming trauma aware does not stop with just recognizing that trauma and how it can affect clients. Instead, it's going to encompass a broad awareness that traumatic experiences, as well as the impact of the individual's trauma, can actually extend to significant others, family members, first responders, and even you. So knowing that trauma is not just an individual experience, but rather the experience of a collective. Family members frequently experience the traumatic express that an individual family member is navigating, and could also be displaying trauma responses. These repeated experiences can increase the risk of secondary trauma and other symptoms of mental health among the family, and specifically the individuals that we're serving. So prevention and intervention services can provide education, age-appropriate programming tailored to helping people connect with how they have been impacted by trauma. So I ask you, what is anchoring you to your prevention practice? What is grounding you? Oftentimes it helps to stay connected using a quote or a story or an experience that you've had, professional development, and help you assess the level of authenticity that you're coming to the table with, and how you are navigating your own blind spots. So again, many factors are going to contribute to how individuals respond to trauma and create a very complex working environment for us, but they also create so many opportunities for us to become nimble, for us to look at our curriculum and break it and say, this is how I'm going to use this curricula to best support my survivors that I serve, to best support the communities I serve, and to be trauma informed. So I want to leave you with just a moment of reflection. This is an activity that we love to do in live in person. And if we had a whole other hour, we would do this in groups and really dive in, because I would love to learn how you specifically are navigating this in your specific work. But unfortunately, we're going to be busting out of here in a few minutes, and we may not have time to do that. So I'm going to leave you with a little activity that I'd like for you to consider to do on your own, with your team, with your organization. But it starts with you alone. So I would like for you to take a moment and take an inventory, and create a list of something really weird. I'm going to ask you to do something really weird. I want you to create a list of how you can create spaces that do not have safety and connection, which sounds ridiculous, but I want you to go wild in your list. I want you to start documenting all the ways that you can create an unsafe environment, how you can dissuade connection between you and your participants. I want you to make that list, and I want you to write it down. This is serious. I then want you to sit back, and when you're alone, if you're doing this alone or with your group now, I want you to consider, is there anything that you're doing that even resembles, even for a little, even just a little iota, is there anything that you're doing that resembles your list, that could even be associated with your list? And again, this is something that you're going to do alone, or something with your group you have a lot of camaraderie with, I hope. So I want you to please be unforgiving with your work, and really think about, is there anything that you're doing that looks like this ridiculous list that you just created that may not be so ridiculous? And then alone or in your group, I want you to ask yourself, how are you going to stop it? What is your first move? What resources do you need in order to make a change? Ask yourself, what triggers this reaction? What triggers us to operate in this particular way? And have a conversation with your team, with yourself, with your mentor, with your ED, whatever's safest. And think about how you can innovate your particular work. So we've got some great comments that have popped up. So Valerie shares that one of her previous jobs, part of being trauma informed, was changing our dress code. We wore jeans more often instead of dress clothes, and it helped change the power dynamic. I just want to applaud this. The professionalism of our movement is part of our problem, and we get in our own way by showing up dressed to the nines, or not really looking like the communities that we serve. So I really appreciate how you all paid attention to your dress code and how you're showing up in your community, because it displays power if the community that you're serving doesn't dress like that. Or if they're not dressed like that in the moment, it shows that you are powerful and they may not be. Excuse me. Johnetta shares, trauma does not discriminate and it is pervasive through the world. Acute trauma results from a single event. Chronic trauma is repeated, prolonged abuse. Complex trauma is exposure to different and multiple types of traumatic events. Thank you for helping us to unpack the various levels of trauma. Again, trauma is something to study, something to consider, and something to really build your skill and how you're identifying it. And first on my list is not tailoring to our Spanish-speaking clients only. Thank you, Language Justice, offering your services in the language that your community needs it in. One of the fundamental things that we can do to be trauma-informed practitioners. And Mr. Fuentes is sharing that he is posting all of our sessions on ccdv.org following our symposium. Thank you. I will definitely be going and looking at all the presentations that I didn't get to see. Folks, we are 4 minutes away. Thank you so much. Again, I want you to save my email. There's my cell phone number. I may regret this, but I'm gonna throw this out there because I work from home. So this is the best way to reach me, but I would love to hear from you. You can text me, you can call me. And because it's what year is this, 2022? Feel free to text. I do love a text. But I thank you all. Yes, you can send me funny memes. Please do. Please do. But it was a pleasure having this conversation with you all. I am so grateful to this opportunity and grateful to CCDV for hosting such an incredible symposium. Any questions, any concerns, any pushback to what I shared today? You have 3 minutes to push back on me, and then we're done. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your conference. I look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to those funny memes, Valerie. I'm gonna be on the lookout. So have a wonderful day, and I will talk to y'all soon. Take care, folks.